spoke a moment ago about what you won't do in terms of your negotiations with Republicans, but I'm interested in what you've signaled you already might do. In particular, by conceding in these negotiations to some form of a cap or freezing spending, are you concerned that Mr. McCarthy has already forced you into accepting a policy position that could tip this economy into a recession?
No, I don't believe that's the case at all. As a matter of fact, I think that we can reach an agreement. As I've told you, and you may be aware, you've seen it, we have provided for a proposal that would cut $1 trillion off the baseline spent from the year before by just agreeing to deal with what was initially offered. And secondly, we're in a situation where let me put it this way. If you all were doing your budget at home and you said, okay, we have to make some cuts, would you only look at the spending, or would you also look at your income, what was coming in the door, to determine what you could afford? And so part of what I've been arguing from the beginning is a need to consider the tax structure as well as cutting spending. I'm willing to cut spending, and I propose cuts in spending of over $1 trillion. But I believe we have to also look at the tax revenues. The idea that my Republican colleagues want to continue the $2 trillion tax cut that had profound negative impacts on the economy from the Trump administration, the fact that we've provided for the number, we got a lot of input from serious economists and former administration officials in both parties that we need more people who are qualified to be able to look at the tax returns of the 1,000 billionaires in America. Very complicated stuff. It's estimated that if we had the appropriate number of tax personnel, that we would save somewhere between, we would generate somewhere between $200 billion and $400 billion in tax revenue. And there's a lot of other, for example, the idea that we're, in terms of taxes, that they refuse to, for example, I was able to balance the budget and pass everything from the global warming bill. Anyway, I was able to cut by $1.7 billion in the first 2 years the deficit that we were accumulating. And because I was able to say to it that the 55 corporations in America that made $400 billion, or $400 billion, that they pay zero in tax, zero. And so we said, you got to pay a minimum of 15% taxes. What a horrible thing. You're paying more than 15% in taxes, every one of you out there. And so guess what? We not only balanced the budget, we were able to reduce the deficit by $1.7 billion. And so there's a lot of things that they refuse to look at in terms of tax generation, as well as what kind of people we're going to increase taxes for. And like I said, we're now down to, we went from roughly 740 billionaires to about 1,000 billionaires in America. They're paying an average tax rate of 8%. Raise your hand if you want to pay 8% only. I think you'd all be ready to do that. So my point is that there's a lot of things that they refuse to entertain, and they just said revenue is off the table. Well, revenue's not off the table. And so that's what we continue to have a significant disagreement on the revenue side.
But you don't think the spending cuts themselves will cause a recession?
I know they won't. I know they won't. Matter of fact, the fact that we were able to cut government spending by $1.7 trillion, that didn't cause a recession, that caused growth. Look, we have the lowest unemployment rate in over 50 years. We've created 7 million new jobs, including 800,000 manufacturing jobs. We have moved in a direction where we're rebuilding and reconstructing America through the Infrastructure Act. Look, here's the other thing. I'm sure, I'm not sure, my guess is I'll get a question about, well, wait a minute, the American people aren't satisfied. Well, guess what? As I told you all before, most of this, what we've passed, doesn't kick in, it only kicks in over time. And so the fact is, for example, that if you're in a situation where I'll give you the one example that I've used, everybody understands the easiest, is insulin. Well, I decided that we were going to be in a position where we were not going to continue to pay the highest drug prices in the world. And that's what we do, by the way. Same manufacturer of a drug in the United States, selling it here in Japan, selling it in Tokyo, or selling it in Berlin, or selling it around the world. They pay a lot less than we pay at home. So we said a simple proposition. Let's take a look at how much it costs to make the product. And I'm not going to ask you to show of hands like I do in a town meeting, but if I usually ask how many people know somebody who has type 1 or type 2 diabetes, and almost at least half the audience raises their hand. Well, they were paying somewhere between $400 and $700 a month for their insulin that they badly need to stay healthy and alive. Well, guess what? It costs $10, T-E-N, $10 to make, to package. Total amount, you could argue maybe as much as $13. Well, guess what? Now they can't charge more for Medicare can't, because Medicare is taking American tax dollars and paying for the elderly's health care needs. You can't charge more than $35 for that drug. That saves $160 billion. Hear it? $160 billion less will be paid out by the American taxpayer to help the elderly people on Medicare with a problem. Well, a lot of this is just kicking in. We're in a situation where next year, for the drug cost, no senior will have to pay total cost of all the drugs, from expensive cancer drugs to whatever drugs they're taking, will not have to pay more than $3,500 a year. The following year, we've already passed this is the law now. The following year, they won't have to pay more than $2,000. That saves another $200 billion that we're paying out. But the other team won't count this. Even though it's a law, we passed it, they won't count that as reducing the debt. So there's a lot of those kinds of disagreements we have. And my guess is that I'm going to be talking to the Speaker of the House on the way back on the plane, because there'll be morning time over at home. And I'm going to be in that plane about an hour or so. And my guess is he's going to want to deal directly with me and making sure we're all on the same page. But that's probably more than you wanted to know.